What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, trying to bring you ideological resources for brewing some zesty theological goodness right to your earpiece, the earbud. Or maybe you're playing it out loud. I don't know. Anyway, today on the podcast, we have a return visit from the British philosopher, theologian, priest, and scholar Keith Ward, Fellow of the British Academy, priest in the Church of England, canon of Christ Church, Oxford. Yeah, he studies comparative theology, religion and science, and, was the Regius Professor of Divinity at Oxford for quite a while. I've been on the podcast a number of times. He's back on the podcast talking about a book called Religion in the Modern World, Celebrating Pluralism and Diversity. We have a good old time talking about the nature of religion, pluralism, how we've understood it academically over time, the different types of accounts of religion, how different religious traditions and their distinctiveness can be understood in a theological way that doesn't dismiss their distinctiveness, think we're all the same, or think only one has complete, total access to the truth, and a bunch of other exciting things. So, if you listen to this podcast regularly, Keith Ward is awesome. That he's one of the greatest living theologians, and he's here. All right, so get ready. Before we jump in, I want to give a heads up, a couple dates to put on the calendar. On the 29th of August, we have a book group for all the Homebrewed Christianity community members and anyone that just wants to join the book group. Robin Henderson Espinosa and I are going to be reading and engaging the book Identity by Francis Fukuyama. If you are a member of the Homebrewed community, or you go to the website, sign up for Robin and I's reading group, you will be able to join live. We'll talk about the book, engage it, wrestle with it, open it up for questions. It'll be a lot of fun. You can sign up there, or if you're a member of the Homebrewed group, you'll get it delivered on our private podcast feed. So yeah, sign up. Check out the other books we're going to be doing in the next few months. If you are in the Indianapolis area, I'm going to be there the 20th and 21st of September. September 2019, 20th, 21st, doing 3 different events, all of them free. So basically, you just have to show up and get ready to have a nerdy old time. 2 nights with different types of live podcasts, excitement and such, and a day-long workshop doing progressive theology in the process style. Introducing process theology for progressive Christians. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then on the 27th and 28th of September, my last event in the United States before I moved to Scotland to take my new position at the University of Edinburgh. We got an event called to Be Prophets. Robin Henderson Espinosa is going to be there. Brian McLaren's going to be there. Steed Davidson's going to be there. It's going to be awesome. And here's the thing. When you go sign up, use the code TRIP, which is my name, so it's TRIPP. It's like falling over, tripping, right? It's like a trip without that, like a single P. A single P is not adequate. You need 2 P's. Or it's tripping without the ing, but it's not trip. But you put that in, you get a discount for Called to Be Prophets, September 27th, 28th. It's right before I head off to Scotland. Yeah. Which is pretty exciting. I just want to say thank you to all of you who heard the special announcement podcast recently, like the last podcast that was on here. You heard about it, and here's the thing, like I'm going to do this 3-year postdoc research fellowship, religion and science. It's a great opportunity for someone trying to become an academic in the theological education, all that kind of stuff. But if you have a family of 5, moving all the way across an ocean is not the easiest thing to do. It's actually extremely expensive. Visas, moving, plane tickets, buying furniture when you get there to move into a place. It's just, anyway, there's just a lot of expenses next to it. And we started a Kickstarter, and quite a few of you, already 80 of you have already donated. It's pretty awesome. If any of you love the podcast, and have ever thought about giving back, you can totally go make a tax-deductible donation to the GoFundMe campaign and help buy our plane tickets, which are currently on my credit card. And everything else is associated with moving to a new country. And if you want to be a part of sustaining the podcast and all that kind of thing, month after month, then become a Homebrewed community member. Go to homebrewedcommunity.com or just go to the website, and there's lots of links to it. And you can not only donate every month and be like, I'm contributing to spreading theological goodness to the masses, you can get access to all sorts of things like the brand new Homebrewed community podcast feed. There's already over 10 episodes on it. And these are going to be not like episodes just without intros or commercials or whatever in it. These are completely different things. They're either lectures or talks I've given. They are whole classes and stuff I've done with that are just for Homebrewed members, or audio stuff from the reading groups. But the most exciting thing, I think, is that we're about to start an introduction to theology, a year-long class. It may go longer than that, depending on all the topics, people, figures, ideas, and stuff y'all want to cover. But here's my goal, is to keep introducing different figures, topics, and such, to give Homebrewed listeners the type of background to fill in the gaps. Because so many people come on the podcast, it's like me. I have a PhD in philosophy, theology, and religion and stuff, talking to a professional philosopher, theologian, biblical scholar, and such. And we all have degrees. There's background knowledge. We all know what different thinkers are, different schools of thought, or what the history of a doctrine is. And everyone that listens, that enjoys it, wrestles with it, doesn't always know that stuff because, well, you were smart enough, to avoid the graduate student experience. And I want to fill all those gaps in, because we need more people that are thinking critically and faithfully and such about faith, wrestling with the questions. We don't need more people with student loan debt. So my thought is I'll just keep filling in all this back information in different lectures each month. Maybe little connections get made, and it helps build the community for the podcast, but it also helps the listeners who want to fill in their theological encyclopedia. Gives them an opportunity to do it. So yeah, go to homebrewedcommunity.com or just go to the regular website and you can click on anything. Join. It'll be amazing. I really appreciate it. We got a whole bunch of new members in the last couple of weeks, and I'm super excited about the class coming up. All right. Now, here's Keith Ward. I'm excited. Talking about his new book, Religion in the Modern World. It's a great book. Check it out. Peace. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and today on the podcast is the one and only Keith Ward talking about his brand new book, or his last book, which has happened before. This one is Religion in the Modern World, Celebrating Pluralism and Diversity. So, yeah, I'm super pumped to talk to you. Out of all the different topics you've wrestled with in your career, when did this one come on the horizon?
Well, right from the beginning, because I began teaching philosophy in various British universities. And when I moved over into religion, I was a professor of the history of religion. So that's always been one of my interests. Mm-hmm. But I suppose most of my published works have been more in what we might call Christian theology, or concentrating more on Christian theology, because you can only do one thing at a time. Looking at world religions and the relation between them and why people have religion and why they differ so much, those have always been key questions for me, from being a philosopher to having a religious commitment of my own. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know when you teach that introduction to religion class, just defining the word religion and all the different theories of religion gets pretty confusing in and of itself. So what kind of framework do you kind of start with when thinking about just the topic religion?
Right. Well, I think we all have a rough idea of what a religion is. The boundaries are very, very obscure and vague, but we all know that if you're sitting in a room mumbling away to yourself and waving your hands in the air, or then you're probably doing something to do with religion. So there are some behavioral features of being religious. And then I don't define religion. I don't go for a definition which rules people out or rules them in. But I think a pretty good idea of religion is that it's about something greater, other than you and of more value than you, and you think you can get in touch with it somehow, and it will, in a way, make your life better if you do. And you probably think that some people are better at this than others. And so you tend to look to them to tell you how to get in touch with this reality and how to use it for good. And I think if you did that, well, most religions would come under that heading. They differ a lot, of course, in how they do it and what they're talking about. But that's a general thing. It's something other and greater than human life that can improve human life if you connect properly with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I noticed at the end of the book, in the appendix, you talk about your own commitment and the way that shapes your reflection on religious diversity, religious pluralism, and a religious dialogue. And there you talk about a threefold structure of religion where there's that core ideal, some type of causal power, and a telos, a goal in which you move. And one of the things about that kind of threefold structure is, it is transferable across religions, but it assumes that to understand a religion or the religious community, you're engaged within it. And, a lot of definitions of religion are ones that describe it, from without. Yeah. So, what do you how do you see that tension in wrestling with religion of accounts that think of the practitioner, the community of practice, and those that take that kind of objective observer distance move?
Yeah. I don't think anybody is really objective. I mean, if you read books about religion, they're either going to be very favorable to one of the views, or they're going to be against some of the views. And so if you read a lot of people in the American discipline of religious studies, you've almost got to be an atheist to do the subject, really. And so you look at it sociologically and say, what are people doing, eating pieces of bread and thinking it's God? And they put it in ways which sound absurd to begin with. So that's not objective. I don't think you can be objective about religion. It's like politics. You can't be objective about politics. You've got to admit that you start with you've been taught in a language and with values that you've learned from somebody. And even if you react against them, you're going to be influenced by what you're reacting against. So I think one of the big mistakes, if you think about politics, about morality, and about religion, is to think that you can be objective, you can be value-free, you can be totally dispassionate. I don't think that's possible.
Mm-hmm. And so early in the book, you talk about the way Durkheim shapes the study of religion.
Yeah.
And so how does his particular way of framing the study of religion set up for the challenge or predicament of pluralism as you see it?
Well, I suppose Durkheim is important because he is often called the father of sociology, really. One of the people who began the method of looking at the behavior of people and what they do and explaining what they do purely in behavioral terms. Mm-hmm. So Durkheim never really asked the question, is there a spiritual reality? Is there a God? He doesn't ask that question. He asks what are the practices that people do and what might account for them. And as people might know, his general opinion is that religion is a way of getting people in large groups to get them excited about various value or moral positions, so that the object of religion is the feeling of the group, really. It's the group mind. So that's not what a believer would say. That not many believers would say that. So he's important because he helped to start sociology, because sociology is really useful when you're looking at religion. You want to know what people do, not just what they say, but it's only part of the story. So I start with him because he's the best known early sociologist of religion, but also just to try and show that sociology can't tell you the whole story. You've got to ask the question, well, is what people are believing reasonable, and are there any good arguments for it? And Durkheim never talks about that.
Yeah, and I've always, especially when you're teaching and it's an adjunct professor and you get the generic introduction to the study of religion syllabus and books where you don't get to pick, I try to emphasize how Durkheim, he turns a study of religion into an explanation of the sacred. So he succeeds as a scholar by explaining away the sacred, but there's no discussion as to whether that's the proper way of articulating religion, and I think this is what you were talking about in the academy today, whether there is even another vantage point. There are things to gain from his vantage point, but does that explanation explain away the phenomena altogether? And I think the way you open the book is similar to kind of like the way you've engaged people around the question of consciousness, like Dan Dennett. For Durkheim, the explanation of religion is the explaining it away. For Dan Dennett, an explanation of consciousness on the terms of neuroscience explains away consciousness.
Yeah, they wouldn't say explaining away. Of course, they think that's explanation. But I agree with you. It is explaining away. You're bound to be saying. I mean, you probably know I've talked to Dan Dennett. He's a delightful man and very much humbler than you might have thought when you've read some of his books. But he actually does think that consciousness as such is not important. And that's where I start with my view of religion anyway. And I think where most religious people start, that there is a reality which is not physical, which is not purely the brain, electrons and atoms. There's something other than that. So I think most religious people would say there's something you could call spirit, and spirit is not material. It exists, and it's the nearest thing to consciousness that you can imagine. So if you said a God, I mean, not all religions have a God, but a God, and most religions really in a different sense think there is some consciousness other than human consciousness. So I think that's very important. And if you miss that out, well, I think you are explaining away, because you're not explaining the experiences that people claim to have in religion. So that in Durkheim, it seems to me, I don't know if you agree, that he doesn't really take the experiences of people seriously. And he doesn't take the intellectual. I don't think he thinks there are any intellectual strong points for religion. He just takes it for granted. That's all dead and gone. And then says, well, why do people behave in these ways? And he thinks, religion can be important because it can get you morally, heated up about something, and that might be good. But it might not.
Yes, like that. That's actually, I think, a helpful observation, because I've been thinking about it in the sense that Durkheim is producing the study of religion, and it comes at a time where the previous kind of early Enlightenment understanding of religion's dying out, where you had this kind of Descartes dualism, you had this mechanistic vision of the world, and you have some types of form of sensationalist version of perception. Well, eventually the mechanistic account of the world gets rid of mind, it gets rid of dualism and such. And then religious experience, if you don't actually have the ability to talk about divine presence, action, experience, is hard to affirm as something genuine. But it's really connected to a mechanistic vision of the world and an insistence that you can only have encounters with things you have a sense organ for. So often for someone like Durkheim, those metaphysical commitments are unconscious, and they're just assumed. And then we take him on authority and end up, giving that kind of reductive account.
Yeah, that's right. That's why, from a philosophical point of view, I would think that Durkheim is not talking about the most important things about religion, and those are the experiences that people have. And you want to know whether they're genuine, are they experiences of anything? And then there's the intellectual question. Could you give good reasons for thinking there might be some spiritual reality. And I agree exactly with you that Durkheim belongs to a time when it was thought there are no good reasons for thinking there is spiritual reality, and there isn't one. So you take that for granted. And I don't think you should do that. You shouldn't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. So how does that the question of religious pluralism show up in that kind of more sterile account of religion, and how are you wanting to shift it with the conversation partners you bring in, via kind of the perennial philosophy and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I think sociology has been good in the sense that it does help to explain why people's religious beliefs and experiences take such different forms. I mean, there are big differences, there's no doubt about it. Buddhists don't believe in a personal creator God. Christians obviously do. And then in Indian religions, you get a different view again of what might be the ultimate spiritual reality, though they think there is one. And trying to account for that in purely intellectual terms is quite difficult. I mean, you may think, well, if it's just a matter of arguing and reasoning, why don't they all just agree they're all rational people? But if you look at sociology, you'll be getting to look at culture and the way people are brought up and the societies they're brought up in, their practices. And I do think that helps to account for the different intellectual ways that people interpret their religious experiences. So it is quite helpful to look at a Buddhist social culture and then look at a Christian social culture and start by explaining the differences between those. I mean, why do people have different cultures? Why does somebody eat with a knife and fork and other people don't? Why do they wear clothes that are different from each other? And then you realize from that point of view, it's not a surprise that people wear different clothes and act in different ways. That's part of their culture, and they like being different. That defines their identity. So it's part of a human existence to want to belong to a group which is different from other groups. You might well think it's better, but it's certainly different. Sociology helps you to do that. If you're purely intellectual, if you're in pure mathematics, you think everybody should agree because the truth is the truth. But in religion, your intellectual and your experiences, your intellectual beliefs and your experiences all go together with your behavior. And that means that they're probably going to be formed in a particularly distinctive cultural group that you actually want to be different from other people's. That's part of what you like,
Mm-hmm.
I hesitate to say anything about making America great again, but there is a view that a lot of people would take that there's something about this unit of people which is of special value, and we ought to keep it and make it better, right? So this can go wrong in lots of ways, but it's part of, we all think that really. We all think I'm part of a community which stands for certain values, and I would like to see these conserved and even improved. So it's not surprising they're all different. So sociology is helpful. That's another reason I started with Durkheim. It's only part of the explanation, but it helps to explain why your ideas don't live in a vacuum. They live in a historical, geographical situation, and you have to realize you're not objective. You're starting from that location in time and space, and your ideas are going to be seen from there. And so you expect them to differ. I mean, that's the main argument of my book. You wouldn't expect religions to be the same because they're religions of particular cultures and human beings. You expect them to differ, and you expect people to like them being different.
Yeah, I find the recognition that all knowledge is situated to be simultaneously liberating and then frustrating, because your natural tendency is to want to be able to give an account that is transferable into other situations, and humans like to have that authority and power. But and I think that's one of the reasons I enjoyed the first two sections of the book in pairing the problem of religious pluralism as explored and set in the trajectory by Durkheim, and then the question of perennial philosophy, where there's this shared source of all religion. And having spent 10 years in California, I can just tell you that the perennial philosophy is live and well. And if you're lucky, you can get like 9 different world religions in one room in one house. They have trinkets from all of it there, just ready. Right. Yeah.
But the point is, it's a self-defeating policy, that, because what you do is you say, well, I'm going to bring all these religions together and hold on to them. What you actually do is you invent a new religion, which nobody else agrees with, and you say, my new religion is great. I want this to be true. So the perennial philosophy people like Aldous Huxley and Fritz Hofschuh and in fact, Huston Smith, very well known in the States, and he holds to this perennial philosophy. They not only think you can put religions together, they think that there's always been one secret, esoteric religion, which has been at the core of all religions. But the thing is, you say, who knows about it? And it turns out, well, only them and their friends. It's actually a very small group of people, and you can locate it in history. So
maybe you could contrast the esoteric bit, so because that may be a new word,
right? Well, I just mean by that, not known by everybody. They're secret. If you become an initiate, you find out the truth, but you need to learn. So everybody who doesn't accept your view, the perennial philosophy, is the unwashed. They're not bright enough to have found out about this, or not spiritual enough. So it's a form of religion where you say, well, you've got to see the secret teachings which are there. And I've spent a long time studying secret teachings of Swedenborg and lots of other people, Madame Blavatsky and Krishnamurti, and lots of people. I think they're very interesting. The thing about them is, they all say, each of them says there's one secret teaching and this is it. And then you find out when you read them, they all disagree with each other. So there isn't one secret teaching at all, because they're all having different teachings, which they say is the one true teaching. So they're in the same mess as everybody else. They're just having a particular view. The case I concentrate on, because I know it best, is Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. And he says this has always been believed everywhere by the initiates, by the people who know the secret truth. But in fact, you can historically trace the view he gives to an Indian sage called Shankara in the 12th century in India. And it's a very interesting and philosophically complicated theory that Shankara had and spiritual path. But it's only one. And if people say, Californians like to say, or they did when I was there, they used to say, India is the place for spiritual truth, and Shankara is the man who knows the truth. And all the Indians know this, and the West doesn't know it. But that's just false. Shankara is not the major Indian view at all. It's one particular view, which is the view of an elite, a social elite, in fact. But it's not. It's only one strain, and I prefer another man called Ramanuja. Mm-hmm. And he's another Indian sage, and more Indians believe in him. So you say, well, this is not just one Indian philosophy and Indian religion. There are thousands of varieties of it. And again, they all differ. So that's what I'm trying to say in the book is people claim there's one hidden secret inner truth. But if you ask them, what is it? It turns out to be just one of lots of different claimants to the same thing. So it would be more straightforward and more honest and more accurate to say, actually, it's not just one truth, but there are some very interesting different varieties of religion, and these are the ones I like. But there's not a perennial. There is no perennial philosophy. There is nothing in religion which is being believed by everybody everywhere, or by the most spiritual people everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes a perennial philosophy is the conceptual framework people grab onto when they want to be nice to their religious neighbors that don't have their own religion. And they want to say that in your life, and you practice different religious tradition than me, I recognize something beautiful and good and true And I'm sure they all cooperate because we're neighbors now in a pluralistic world. And maybe it even shows up in humanism because our neighbor next door, who's an agnostic or an atheist, also has this thing, but that thing connects to what I have in my encounter with Christ. So, like, I think that the perennial philosophy makes sense criticizing when you go look at the actual diversity of religion, but also can get what the desire for a person of faith to say something like that, since it's so popular in a cultural level.
Yeah, it's only popular in some parts of the world, I should
Mm-hmm.
say. But I agree with exactly what you say. You should exactly have that view about people who have different religious faiths than you. But the way to have that is not to say we all really believe the same thing. It's to learn to say we believe different things. There are some very important things we have in common, and we should actually value the differences that we have as well. So if you say you're going to get on well with other people because they're the same as you, well, that's one thing. But actually, it's a better thing to say, I'm going to get on well with you because we are different. And to value that difference, it's very fascinating and helpful to have different views. I think we're actually familiar with that in philosophy, that you have different philosophical views. I'm an idealist, so I think that mind is the basic reality, consciousness is the basic reality, and matter is a sort of expression or some type of projection of consciousness, especially the consciousness of God. But anyway, I believe that. Now, I know most of my philosophical friends don't believe that, and some of them, like Dan Dennett, are materialists and think, well, there's nothing like consciousness doesn't even exist. So we have a huge difference of opinion. Consciousness is the only thing that exists. Dan Dennett says, no, it's not even there. And you say, well, you couldn't get more different than that. But we can still be friends. We can say, actually, what keeps us as friends is we both think philosophy is great. And it is great to have original creative ideas. And that's a possibly good thing. How boring it would be if I just said consciousness is the only thing that exists. And Dan said, yes, you're absolutely right. So everything we said, we would just agree. What a bore. So you've got to learn. The perennial philosophy is wrong because it tries to say you can get on with other people insofar as you agree with them. And the view I'm wanting to put forward, I'm not the only person, but the view I'm in favor of is you should get on with other people because you disagree. And because in a very complicated world like this, it's good to have different views.
Yeah.
Because that helps you to see you haven't got the whole truth. You've got things to learn from other people, but you've still got to commit yourself to a view, and you can't be nowhere. And you've got to try and make that view as good, as rational as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So I get on well with philosophers who are atheists. I mean, no problem. But I would never agree with them. The reason I get on well is because I think they are aiming sincerely at truth. They're just wrong. They're aiming sincerely at goodness. They're not quite so wrong about that, but some differences come up. So I can say they're wrong, but that doesn't mean they're going to hell. It doesn't mean I have to hate them. It certainly doesn't mean I have to kill them and force them to believe what I believe. I think that's the future for religion. You've got to say diversity is good. That's the subtitle of my book, of course, Celebrating Diversity. So I want to say that the person who said this in Christianity first, clearly, is a Protestant, a great Protestant thinker, called Friedrich Schleiermacher. He's the person who invented hermeneutics, the discipline of interpreting scripture and other works as well. And he was the first person to use the word religion in the modern sense of different bits of beliefs about the spiritual world. So he's a very great thinker. And he was somebody who thought it's a good thing. So here's a question to ask yourself. Do you think it's a good thing that there are different religions, or do you think it's a misfortune? It's a great pity. And I'm trying to argue it's actually a good thing, and religious people are very slow to learn that. Very slow.
Yes. I think that that they're slow to learn that. And I wonder how much of it is the power of kind of early Protestantism to shape the imagination, that the justification for each Protestant expression is this: I went back to biblical Christianity. I have in this, in the modern world, all our access to truth now is being criticized through all these different disciplines, but there's this supernatural epistemology connected to my sacred text, and out of that, obviously everyone should be Baptist, but not the Calvinist Baptist, the Arminian Baptist, and not just the normal Arminian Baptist, but like the missionary type. But and then the Presbyterians can do the same thing and that kind of thing. How do you see Schleiermacher inheriting that individualism and that separatism that's part of Protestantism, but seeing the diversity not as finally getting to the true church, but an affirmation of the many?
Well, he was a very popular preacher. He was the most popular preacher of his day, and people flocked to his church. And that was in the early 19th century. He was very much in favor of the ecumenical movement as well. He didn't actually think that churches should be separated completely from each other. So what he was looking for was a federation of churches which had different beliefs, but they did have in common a faith in spiritual reality that was for good and for human welfare. So there was a basic sort of agreement. But so he was a proponent. He wasn't really in favor of churches which, well, what happens is churches begin to hate each other or dislike each other or say, I'm right and they're totally wrong. And I think now, well, a good example is the Roman Catholic Church in the Second Vatican Council, actually, for the first time, clearly said that non-Christians, those who are not members of the Roman Catholic Church, too, so Protestants as well, can be saved. They can be saved by their own faith or by means of their own faith. They'd all be Catholics if they saw the truth, but they can't. Now, since then, Catholic theologian has gone a lot further, of course, with or without the approval of the Vatican. But it's also possible for people of any religious faith to say, we can really celebrate the fact there are Baptists and Arminians and predestinarians. We can see why they believe that. So we're not going to stop them existing. We're not even really going to say, I wish they believed what I believe, just like that, because they've got to be true to their own education and their own consciousness. And that's more important. So I think what I'm going to say, it's more important that people follow what they sincerely believe to be the truth and try to go on seeking that truth, than it is for them to agree with me. So as an idealist Christian, I think it's more important for non-idealists to continue exploring their own way. And I believe in the end, we will converge about a lot of important things. And the really important thing as a modern world is we will not try to make other people believe what we believe. That's the curse of religion. And of course, if that were true, you'd have no religious terrorists, because you wouldn't ever think it right to kill anybody else because they differ from you in belief. So I think it's a very important thing in the world. And Christians have to believe it too. Christians have to be able to say, I'm glad Muslims exist, right? I'm actually glad. It's not just a pity, right? It's a good thing. That's what you ought to get around to explain to yourself. Why do I think it's a good thing that there are lots of different sorts of music and lots of different sorts of literature and lots of different sorts of religion? Yeah, why not?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is the coming to terms with the historicity of our own religious tradition, and recognizing that religions have a history, that they change, and that type of thing not only gives you permission to value the particularities of your tradition again, maybe in the face of, bland pluralism, but also to recognize beauty in a different key of sorts in other religious traditions.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. What a lot of Christians don't appreciate is how much their own tradition has changed. I mean, I think you could say traditions change about every 30 years, right? I'm not the first person to say that. But I know that the tradition I was brought up in, so I'm in the Church of England, as it happens, and that tradition over 30 years has changed hugely. I mean, in little way, well, perhaps in a big way, we have women priests, which nobody ever thought of when I was young. And we have new translations and different translations of the Bible. We have a different liturgy. We do things in different ways. So a huge change. That's in 30 years or 40, my case, a bit more. So if you think, well, what's happened over 2,000 years? There have been enormous changes. And to have that sense of history, historical change, once you realize it happens in your tradition, you can no longer be so confident that what you think now at this time and space is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, I hope I'm going in the direction of the truth. But with all these changes, you can see it's not that truth is relative. That'd be wrong. It's not relative. It's that we can't see it very well. So there's an absolute truth, I'm sure. But we're not going to get it because we see it from a perspective. To see your own perspective, two things are necessary, as you just really said. And one is you learn the history of your own tradition, and you see how much that's changed. And the other is you see other traditions like Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus. They have the same changes in their traditions. What they are today is not what they are always, what they've always been, but there are always new possibilities of change. And I think that's exciting. And so I'm a believer in the ecumenical movement, and ecumenical really means worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean everybody's got to believe what I believe. It means I've got to be open to learn from other traditions, but also to be able to try and convey to them what's good about my tradition, and in the hope that they can gain something from that.
So as an idealist, how do you understand the history of a tradition? Like if you were to talk, if you look back at the history of Christianity, what is the relationship of the historical transformation throughout that process and the divine mind?
Well, I think when the Christian tradition first started to be put in a philosophical way by the 3rd or 4th centuries AD, it was Plato and Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosophers that they used. And that was the best philosophy going, and they did a great job. But to be frank, it's obsolete. I mean, when nobody's going to believe exactly what Plato and Aristotle said now. So you've got to say that's got to be rethought. And because they did this, and one of the biggest changes for Christianity has been the theory of evolution. And that's a big change. I take it it's true. I'm in no doubt at all that it's true. But nobody before, the 16th century anyway, thought of an evolving world or a universe which started 14.5 billion years ago and will go on for billions of years. Nobody thought of that. So we've got a completely transformed worldview. Well, that trickles through to what you believe about Jesus, right? You can no longer believe that we live in the last few years of the history of the universe. That's just not on the cards. It's unbelievable. So you've got to think yourself back to what made them believe that then. Well, obviously they thought the world was very small and it was getting worse and there was not much point going on, right? And now we think, no, it can get better. We can have better computers and television sets and things, and things can improve, have better health, live longer, have a better life, we hope. So we can have hope for a future. We can have fear about the future too, and responsibility, but we can have hope. They couldn't see things changing for the better. Everything was getting worse. So there's a big change just within Christianity from thinking at the beginning, undoubtedly, that the world hadn't been there long, it wasn't going to exist very long, it wasn't going to change, it was all getting worse, it would all come to an end. And now people are thinking, no, this is a vast universe. The possibilities are enormous. The threats are enormous, but there are possibilities which are enormous. Maybe we've got to rethink Christianity in those terms. Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit priest, in case I don't pronounce that very, it's Teilhard. And he was a Jesuit, Roman Catholic, but he transformed hope for the end of the age, into hope for the renewal of creation through growing technology. Right. Now you can argue about that, but it's a huge change. Right. So, so an idealist would say, well, this looks as though it's a progressive learning more about the nature of mind and its possibilities of self-realization in this physical universe.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that strikes me is the way in which those for whom their religious tradition matters most are at a time in history where they also realize the one they happen to be in is most often a product of a historical accident, that you were born into the family of a particular situation, particular time, particular history. And so, if for most of human history, you were born into a place and there was that shared sacred canopy of a religious tradition that was there, and evolutionary psychology, cognitive scientists can talk about the way it functioned and help us adapt and all that kind of stuff. Yep. But now we're born into a place where if you're taught the religious tradition well, from underneath the canopy, you can, it's like covered in stained glass windows, and there are these beautiful, and the light of the world shines through it. It gives you a sense of self, a place in the world, all that kind of stuff. But we also can see our religious tradition from the outside, and like stained glass windows, if you're on the outside, it just looks like a bunch of 4-year-olds with colored rocks, and it doesn't show a narrative, and it doesn't do anything, right? And so one of the challenges of religion today and of faith today is what do you do when the religious experiences you have that before felt like this place you were put in the world with a purpose, a beginning, a meaning, and all that kind of stuff, are so situated that you can also stand on the outside and go like, that's kind of sloppy historical.
Well, I mean, a lot of what you just said was beautifully put, but some of it wasn't right. And I think what the bit that wasn't right was, it's just sloppy and it's just accident. You're not, you don't have to think that. Yeah. What you can think is that the variety of human life and culture and belief is actually going somewhere, and you do have a purpose. And at this specific point in history, I'd say it's pretty clear what that purpose is. For a religious believer, it is to make your tradition and your belief less harmful to other people and more directed to human welfare and concern with everybody in the world, not just your friends and fellow believers. So you have a very definite purpose, and that is to make the beautiful and the good more apparent in your world. And that is a very definite purpose. So I don't think you go outside the stained glass windows and look in and see a whole mess. You look in and see a whole set of possibilities for letting the light from all these windows illuminate the little bit where you are. And it's your responsibility somehow to hold as much of that together as you can and make the world more open and more beautiful and more true. So I'm not in favor of total accident and lack of purpose. I think God, I'm a Christian, and I believe God has a purpose for each individual human life, but it's to do with improving the place you start from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I think that's important because and you talk about this some when you talk about John Hick. Like sometimes the response for people of faith, when you realize the multiplicity of traditions that are there is to then inscribe them all into one big picture, so they're all kind of equally wrong and equally right at the same time. And what you're saying isn't that, but I think there is the response for people, when their consciousness kind of becomes aware of the historicity of their own situation and their tradition, is to want to John Hick the situation.
Yes, that's right. Well, I do talk a lot about John Hick. He was a great friend of mine. I think he was a very good philosopher. He always wanted to be a philosopher, not a theologian, he said.
Well, as a Claremont grad, we all have to salute to him on a consistent basis.
Well, yes. And his view, he was what he called a pluralist, and he did tend to say that all religions are more or less equally true, by which he really meant to think they're more or less equally effective in making people better or worse. I used to discuss this with him, and he never really believed I was disagreeing with him, but I was, because I think truth is different from making people better. I certainly want to make people better, and I think the truth ought to make people better, but there's still different things. You could have a truth which didn't actually make people better, and you can't just say it's true. That's a good American school of philosophy, isn't it? Pragmatism, that it's true if it makes things better. That's not right. Some truths are very unpleasant. So I'm very concerned with truth, but and I think John Hick saying that all religions are more or less equally true is not accurate. It's not true. It's not accurate, because if a Buddhist says there is no creator God, I think the Buddhist is wrong, and I sincerely believe the Buddhist is wrong, and one of us has to be wrong, right? So there is a question of people being wrong. It's just that I have to admit that I might be wrong. So I don't think I am. But there's a difference between me saying I'm right and you're so wrong, I'm going to stop you believing what you believe, and saying, well, I think I'm right, and it's up to me to show you what is good about our belief and what is reasonable about it. But I certainly will not only tolerate your belief, I'll actually learn to value the fact that you're believing it conscientiously with a good intention of making things better. And that's the important thing. I hope I've got the same moral commitment that John Hick had, which is religion ought to be making things better. That is a large part of its point. But it's connected with truth, and I don't think he quite emphasized that enough. In the end, I as an idealist Christian, I want to say idealist Christianity is probably nearer the truth than anybody else. And then I just climb out of my stained glass windows and I say, well, your little brain, how can you really seriously say that? And I said, well, I have to. That's where I see things from, and I've got to keep criticizing myself, but at the same time, I've got to remain true. So I can say with a straight face, I committed to the lordship of Jesus Christ. So I'm committed against a Buddhist who says Jesus was just another spiritual figure of not all that great significance. I'm committed to that. But it makes a difference when you say, I believe this partly because of where I was born and what I was taught and the knowledge that I've got from my surroundings. So I think that I don't have the whole truth. Mm-hmm. I've got to be committed to what I believe to be true, sincerely. And I've got to believe something to be true. If I'm an atheist, I've got to believe that's true. So it's not arrogance. You've got to do that. So you've got to weave a rather tenuous, difficult path between commitment to the truth and openness to other perspectives. But we've got a world where you can do that. I think it is possible to do that. And I do it. Lots of people do it. I do it by having actual personal relationships and conversations and worship occasions with non-Christians. Mm-hmm. And specifically in my case would be Jews and Hindus, certain sorts of Hindus. But you never say, I'm giving up my tradition. You say, well, it's possible for us to make progress by a sort of reflection of other traditions in our own, and you can do the same. And then let's see where we get to after that.
Mm-hmm. So how does the learning to celebrate pluralism and diversity change the way you see the future of religion, and in the West, its relationship to the global South, where religion's growing and thriving, and then where the question of secularism or detradition spirituality is kind of on front of the mind?
Yeah. Well, nobody can foretell the future. There's a pessimistic future and an optimistic future. The pessimistic one is that very violent and exclusive views of religion will triumph, and you get millions and millions of Christians and Muslims and Hindus all saying we're not going to allow the other ones to exist. So at the present moment, I mean, in India, I'm sorry to say, the BJP, the ruling party, says to be Indian is to be Hindu. I think that's terrible. And I certainly wouldn't want to say to be English is to be Christian. No, not at all. And to be American is to be, I don't know, Seventh-day Adventist or Mormon. To be a Utah, to live in Utah is to be a Mormon. No, I think that's retrograde. What you've got to say is people are free to form their beliefs. So the more optimistic view of the future, that people will come to see differences of belief, big differences like Buddhists and Christians, like most of us now see the difference between Baptists and Presbyterians. There's a difference, but it's not catastrophic. And we can all live together, and we know from time to time have tea, right? And you wouldn't say the ecumenical movement between churches is impossible. We've made amazing strides. Again, when I was a boy, I would never have gone into a Roman Catholic church. It wasn't done. You wouldn't do it. Now, I'm always in Roman Catholic churches, and they always come to mind. So that's been a huge change. So I'm an optimist. I think it's possible for religions, without agreeing, to come together in a search for a truth, which we all agree, really, we only understand very imperfectly. As Christians, we say, now I see in a mirror dimly or in a glass darkly, but then, not yet, I will see face to face and know as I am known, but not yet. So I think a bit of humility is built into the process.
So one thing that comes to mind would be how you understand religion and whether or not something like a humanism or something like that gets classified as such. Because there are like Christians, especially more progressive ones, are going to think they have more in common when it goes to their operating system with their agnostic neighbor that's existentially engaged in some spiritual practice and seeking to address climate change than their technically their same religion, who thinks Earth is made in 6,000 years ago, and as Jesus is about to come back. So how does the framework you're developing help reshape relations across the religious and non-religious?
Yeah, I think the view I'm taking will never be accepted by everybody. So you've got to say there are always going to be Christians who think the world was created in 6 days. There are always going to be that. The best you can do with that is not talk about it, basically. And you say, well, we still worship Christ, so let's just not talk about evolution because, we know we're going to disagree. So that's all right. I mean, you conservatives and socialists in Britain, anyway, get along well together, but they're totally opposed in their political ideas. The same in religion, you can do that. So I'm never going to aim for a new religion, which is all the other religions put together. I'm rather got the idea that all the religions will change, that go on changing. Even fundamentalism, biblical fundamentalism, is bound to change because sooner or later they found out it was all written in Hebrew and didn't mean what they thought. So those changes will happen. And I think, because I believe in truth, and because I think I'm, nearer to it than a fundamentalist, I believe that the religious views will converge to an extent, but they'll never become the same. So I want to continue having differences, but to have a convergence in commitment to relationship, a conscious relationship to a spiritual reality which makes for the welfare of everyone on the planet. Mm-hmm. And we can all do that. And that we have to accept there are different ways to do that. So I agree with you. Our humanist friends might be much nearer to us than our fundamentalist friends. The trouble is, in Britain, anyway, in the UK, humanists are anti-religious. They say we are opposed to religion. And I tell them they're not, because humanism started in the Christian faith, Christian humanists like Erasmus. But that's what they say. So I think we need a little evolution there, enough conversation to show humanists that they're not anti-religious. It's just they're not interested in religion. That's a different thing. And get religious people to say humanists are not really anti-religious, though they say they are. They want to value human life, and that's a central Christian belief. So again, it's going to be hard to do. It's not at all easy. I know it's very difficult. And lots of people get trapped in their religions by thinking they've got to toe some sort of line. But if they find out that line, in the case of fundamentalism, was started in the 1930s in Chicago, and nobody had ever thought of it before that, they might think, well, maybe it's not the biblical truth after all. Maybe that way of reading the Bible is new. Right.
Oh, well, I have some family members I've tried explaining this to before, and ideas that are eternal in the mind of God, namely like bourgeois ethics in southeastern United States, white Christianity, them having historical origins just means that the church was derailed for a long period of time, Keith. This is what happens. I had a great aunt who, and she was a primitive Baptist. So, and this was not a derogatory term.
I know.
Oh, and she was real clear. There was like John the Baptist, and then a very, very dark period where real Christianity went dark until God's elect reemerged.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. I mean, but you find it a bit funny. I find it a bit funny. We'd be kind to your aunt, I'm sure. But you just have to say, look, what level are we having this conversation on? And if we do it on a theological level, you've got to get she wouldn't do that. So you say, not everybody has to do theology. But if you get people to do theology, they will have to see that view of Christianity, that everything went dark, is a very minority view in the world, even among Christians. And when you see that, it changes your perspective. You might not give it up, but you'd have to stop saying things like, it all went dark and nothing good happened. And we'd have to start saying things like, John Calvin actually was the first person to talk about substitutionary atonement. And when you get things like that, you say, maybe it wasn't in Jesus' mind, and maybe that'll have an effect. So, as I say, I'm an optimist, but I don't think everybody has to do theology. But I think the more people do theology and do proper Hebrew and Greek biblical study, the more they open out to seeing that the whole thing has changed a lot. And the primitive Baptists are nothing like the first generation of Christians who didn't even have a New Testament.
And they're all the worse for it. They should have had a New Testament.
They should have had it, yes. It should have been written personally by Jesus and signed.
So so when you think back over the course of your own life and being a a leader in the academy, in the church, and such, and the transformations that happen. What do you think the biggest transitions have been, and how do you understand them from your theological perspective? Like, as a evolutionary idealist, when you see something like you mentioned, the recognition of the ability for women to be ordained and lead and stuff, how do you interpret that outside of just its historical account?
I really do think it was implicit in lots of the New Testament and in Jesus as we have it. And I think if you follow through on Paul's thing about there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female in Christ, if you follow through on that, you immediately get to the fact that women should have the same privileges and rights and obligations as men. You need a sociological explanation for why people didn't see that immediately. In fact, the historians would tell us there probably were women leading early Christianity, and it got wiped out as male chauvinism increased. So I think there are potentialities in the Gospels and in the whole of the Bible that haven't been explored yet. A lot of them to do with social justice. I think there's a great deal in the Bible about that people the year of Jubilee in the Old Testament, every 50 years, everybody has to go back to their original land and give the rest away again, because they shouldn't have more than they had originally. It was all divided out and go back to a little bit of land. I think that's a pretty good idea, but getting very rich Christians to believe that is a bit of a problem. So I don't see it as, I see it as an unfolding of what is embryonically in the tradition. Some bits you've got to drop, like not letting women speak in church. You drop that bit. Pretty easy to do because it was only Paul's opinion after all. But when you say that, and you've got to say, I am selecting. But there are bits there which are world changing. I mean, the whole of the slavery attitude of Christians to slavery changed because the Bible, the New Testament, was read in a new way. And it was seen, I mean, the whole black movement too, is just seen that this racial thing is not justified by anything in the Bible. So you can use the Bible as a living force. It's more like that. I don't see it as, I don't see Christianity as having been weakened. I think I see Christianity as always corruptible, and there are always being reforming movements. And one of the ladies is women. I think the sexual thing hasn't been worked through yet properly. There's more to come, I'm sure. And I think one of the ones at the moment is the treatment of animals, which is very important. And of course, the ecological thing has become more pressingly important. And I hope, well, if there are Christians who now think it would be a good thing if the world ended tomorrow, so to hell with it, I think that's really an anti-Christian attitude. And you say, this is God's world, God created it, we are responsible for making it, tending the garden in the Genesis myth, and that we have to care for what God cares for. So I think there are things in the Bible. I don't think it's an infallible book which tells you everything, but it's full of things which transform human life. I mean, love your neighbor as yourself. That alone would transform the way we live.
Mm-hmm. When I've taught confirmation to adults, so people that grew up in America but weren't religious, already Christians, my way of introducing it is using Jesus' sermon in Luke 4, where he quotes Isaiah and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me; He's anointed me to do," and he lists off all this stuff all the way to the year of Jubilee, recovery of sight the blind, let the slave go free, and then let him go read the Isaiah passage, and they notice Jesus adds a whole additional group to get blessed and cuts out, and may God have vengeance on his enemies. And so there's that, but no one's going to go and say, oh, there's Jesus. He doesn't know what he's doing with his religious tradition. And so part of his own fidelity was receiving the wisdom of Isaiah and then, doubling the blessing and cutting out the violence. And then he gets done and he tells us two stories where where it gets extended to Gentiles. And it's at that point as people want to kill him. And so there's this movement in the life of faith that part of faith is turning its wisdom against itself and demanding it kind of grow and expand.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I don't think we've got up to speed with half of what's in the Bible yet, morally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that Jesus explicitly said anything about specific moral problems of nuclear destruction. Of course, he didn't explicitly say anything. But thinking through his life and the way that he lived and the way that he always sought reconciliation, that still has... I think he's still a great teacher of how to live. So I am committed to that. And I'm not going to give that up. My celebration of diversity is just, you can find in Buddhism very good ways to live well, not being attached to riches, etc. So they still don't agree, but there are so many points of similarity and difference that it's better to live in a diverse world and live your own life knowing and appreciating the way other people live their lives. It's as simple as that, really. Mm-hmm. Can you live with a neighbor who believes very different things from you, as long as the one proviso, they are really seeking to do what is right and they're really concerned to believe what is true, then the differences are perfectly more than acceptable. Often, you can be glad that they exist.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I've enjoyed talking with you about the book, and I hope everybody goes and checks it out. Religion in the Modern World, Celebrating Pluralism and Diversity, by the one and only Keith Ward.
No, there are some others.
Well, okay, you're my favorite then.
Of us on the internet.
All right, my favorite Keith Ward.
Okay.
I'm not even going to tell the others that I've already assessed them. Like from a distance, I've already decided.
They're not theologians. I think I'm the only theologian.
The only theological Keith Ward?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else in the book or on the horizon you want to share?
On the horizon, well, there might be another book. I never seem to stop. But for that book, no, that'll do. I think I end off the book with an actual debate that took place between Buddhists and Christians, and I point out that the interesting thing is that the Buddhists disagreed with one another as much as the Christians disagreed with the Buddhists, which was interesting. But the Buddhists were happy to say they belong to Buddhism. Christians were happy to say they belong to Christianity. So perhaps we could all say, well, we belong to a richly varied religious world in which we follow Christ.
All right. Thank you.